detail up.
It's more of a war zone where it's continuous bombing, shooting. Drones are within the hospital area, targeting and shooting anyone moving between the buildings. The ambulances are not allowed to move in or out of the hospital. Whoever tries to move will be killed.
Charles Blow, this situation in Gaza has become a liability for President Biden at home. Arab American voters expressing a desire to not vote for him again. African Americans, young black voters who are aligned with the Palestinian cause, turning against him. It's a real problem, even in his own administration. Letters being sent around from people in the administration objecting to the policy, including members of Congress getting similar missives from their own staffs. Here's a poll I want to show you. This is President Biden. If, in fact, there was a five-way race for president right now, he would get 35%. There's just one poll, just a Quinnipiac poll, and it is a year out. 38% for Donald Trump. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. polling at 17%. Cornel West at 3%. Jill Stein at 3%. This doesn't even include Joe Manchin, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Talk a little bit about the ways in which this conflict has impacted President Biden and changed in some ways the way people look at how his reelect might look.
Right. So I always have to say this when starting out this conversation, that there is no real comparison between what Joe Biden is doing and what Trump has basically signaled that he wants to do to the country, which is basically to destroy it. So I think we always have to just start there, even when discussing whatever the weaknesses Biden may have. I do think that the Gaza situation has opened up a real chasm between the Democratic coalition that existed and younger parts of that coalition. They're just really upset. It is hard to look at this and not be upset on some level, even when you accept that Hamas committed a terrorist attack, killed 1,200 people. That's horrific. Even if you accept that it is horrific that they took hostages, and that is a horrible thing to do in any regard. You don't know where your loved ones are. That's horrific. Still, when you have over 10,000 people killed in 1 month of war, it is unconscionable. There's no other way to think about that. I've heard people say, well, when you're attacked in a terrorist attack, you can't tell that country what to do. You couldn't tell the U.S. not to go into Afghanistan. Even there, the comparison doesn't hold. The Afghan war, I think there were almost 50,000 civilians killed in that war over 20 years. If you average that out, that's 200 people a month. That's still horrible, but it doesn't stack up to 10,000. And maybe you can say that in the beginning of a war, there were more civilians killed than at the end, whatever you want to say. You can say that Hamas may be inflating the numbers a little bit. I take that, your point. Still, the numbers are incredible. And when you understand that more than half of those, at least by the reports, are women and children, how do you deal with that? And I think a lot of people, particularly young people, are looking at that and saying, this is not a moral thing. This is immoral, and I have to take a stand. And that is a problem for Joe Biden, because those would be his voters.
What's kind of sort of jarring, Michael Beschloss, is that Joe Biden's brand has been built on empathy. And this is one of those places where his empathy has seemed to fail him, the way he's communicated about this, particularly since there are, the images that we're seeing are so horrific, and so many of them involve children. I mean, the images of those infants in that incubator where they're all just trying to warm each other because the incubators don't work anymore. It's hard to watch. And it has broken Joe Biden from a part of his base that had kind of forgiven him for some other things that they wanted him to do that he didn't do. Historically, it does. I don't know. Where do you think that this places him? Because where he stood vis-a-vis Ukraine and where he stands vis-a-vis Israel and Hamas feels so completely different. It's like two different presidents are running for re-election.
Well, the numbers would suggest that this is a division among Biden voters and Democrats that, from his point of view, he's going to have to resolve between now and less than a year from this month. So that is absolutely true. I would totally underline what Charles said, and that is as much as people may be rightfully disturbed by a lot of the things that they are seeing, the overwhelming question is probably going to be, are Americans going to vote for Joe Biden, who with all of his flaws, loves democracy, wants to preserve our system, or for Donald Trump, who'd like to bring all of this down, end the rule of law, as he said, stop the Constitution, usher in what amounts to a military dictatorship. And if I could bring in another thing, beyond what we've been talking about tonight, you were talking, Joy, about, what is the effect of what we're seeing today on domestic politics. Other leaders in other countries, especially those who hate us, know that they can do a lot to elect the president they want by initiating or exacerbating international events. Take 1980. Jimmy Carter was president. He was dealing with double-digit inflation, but more than that, he was dealing with a superpower confrontation in Afghanistan and an Iran hostage crisis. Without those two and maybe those three things, Carter would have won. Ever since then, a country that wishes us ill can say, let's resolve the American election. And I'm not talking about the Middle East here. I'm talking about the possibility of an invasion of Taiwan or something that we are not expecting. Let's have an international event that reshuffles the cards. So all I'm saying is that for us to predict the world we're going to be dealing with a year from now is probably, for at least me, a fool's errand.
It is difficult, Helene. I mean, it seems that it's sort of everything everywhere all at once, like the title of that film. And the Middle East crisis has bedeviled every single president since the 1960s. And so Biden is in a particularly difficult place. But how unprecedented is it for you as a journalist who's covered this sort of international community for there to be this much open dissent and public dissent for an American president during a crisis like this? Because on this Israel issue, I don't know that I've ever seen this much internal dissent that's made public.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think one of the issues that makes this so extraordinary is you mentioned earlier that Arab Americans and a lot of young African Americans were very angry at President Biden over this. It's not just them. I have so many Jewish friends who are talking about how their kids are out protesting on behalf of Palestinians. I think it's a very young. So many young college. You see the kind of the crises we're having at these college campuses, and you see so many of these kids who are just starting to vote, who are pissed off about this. And he's also but President Biden is in quite a fix because he's also getting stuff from the pro-Israel crowd, and he's afraid of alienating the people at AIPAC. And we were talking about this in the New York Times newsroom just the other day about it almost feels as if for Biden to save his presidency, he's going to have to figure out a way to bring peace to the Israelis. He's going to have to actually solve the whole problem and come up with peace for the Israelis and Palestinians. He's in such a hole with this, and it's a very hard thing. And I think the administration, Ben kind of alluded to this, but the administration sort of had not realized how much the world had passed by their standard response to this issue, which is first and foremost just show how much you support Israel. And I think they were a little bit taken by surprise at how much the world has started to move beyond and starting to promote but to consider the plight of the Palestinians on equal terms as the plight of the Israelis who also want peace in their land.